Hello, everyone. My name is Joanne Lockwood, and I am your host for the Inclusion Bites podcast. In this series, I will be interviewing a number of amazing people and simply having a conversation around the subject of inclusion, belonging, and generally making the world a better place for everyone to thrive. If you'd like to join me in the future, then please do. Drop me a line to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. That's SEE changehappen.co.uk. You'll be able to catch up with all of the previous shows on iTunes, Spotify, and the usual places. So plug in your headphones, grab a decaf, and let's get going. Today is episode 23 with the title, Reducing Your Fear and Anxiety. And I have the absolute honour and privilege to be joined by Mark Wingfield. Mark described himself as someone who empowers individuals by giving them hugely practical techniques to handle whatever life may throw at them. And when I asked Mark to describe his superpower, he said, my empathy. So hello, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Joe. Thank you very much indeed. It's great to be here.
So tell me, why do you feel reducing your fear and anxiety is important? What does that mean to you?
I think it's so universal that if you don't manage to conquer fears and anxiety, how on earth are you going to be able to achieve your potential? There are so many things that can hold people back and not allow them to perform to their best. And with all the richness that we have in our society, there are people that I work with who are discriminated against, who are bullied, who are maltreated in some way, or ignored for however they turn up, that it's my privilege to actually help empower them to deal with whatever they have to go through, acknowledge any fears and anxiety they may have, and give them some techniques that will allow them to deal with it appropriately, effectively, and really achieve 100% of what they're capable of achieving.
In the D&I circle, I often hear people talking about bringing their whole self to work. Mm-hmm. And what you've just said there is really quite powerful, because you say holding back, walking away, but we talk about getting people to bring their whole self to work. And I often say that it's very easy for you to say, not necessarily so easy for me to do. The more typical you are, the less stress you have in your life, the easier it is to be yourself, isn't it?
Yeah.
But as soon as you've got something that's hidden within you, there's this anxiety that builds and this fear of being discovered almost, isn't there?
Yes. And I think some of that is you will appear different for whatever reason, whether it's the colour of your skin or whether it's the way you dress or how you sound, how you come across in some other way, whether it's a disability or whatever it might be. And people form their own impressions immediately. And you're aware of that. You know, everybody has unconscious bias of some kind, but some people have overt prejudice, discrimination. And dealing with that can be really tough. So I try and just provide something that will work for an individual. And that can go from just simply communication techniques to staying calm when you're terrified or just a little bit nervous. Or if this is based on trauma, I work as a trauma therapist to take away the emotional context so that people can actually function without worrying about how they feel about it. They just do what they need to do. So it's kind of a colourful array of things I try and bring to the party.
Does it affect younger people more than older people, women more than men, white people less than not white people, straight people less than not straight people, or is it you can't be that clear cut?
I don't think you can be that clear cut. I think that everybody, whatever shape or form or colour or however they show up, we all have our own fears and anxieties. So nobody's without fear and anxiety for whatever reason, but the grades of that and the type of fear and anxiety will obviously differ hugely. And I think if you talk about young people, it's a tough time growing up, isn't it? So it's also a fantastically exuberant time and a fun time, and you got all your health, hopefully, and your full physical abilities, hopefully, or you might have some kind of limitations. But in those formative years, they will dictate so much of the rest of your life. And there are all sorts of different studies that I'm sure you're aware of, as many, if not more, as I, that, for example, by the age of 8, you're more or less there. That's kind of you. And it's detail that's going to be layered on top of that. But the fundamental who you are is kind of by the age of 8. Now, there's lots of different studies, and there'll be people that disagree with that comment. But certainly what we do know is that those formative years are absolutely crucial. And if something happens to you in those formative years that's negative, then that can stay with you and be a real drawback for the rest of your life unless you can do something about
it. Do you think that the modern world, whether that's online gaming, social media, the selfie culture, increases the anxieties that people may have, or introduces new threats into people's lives?
Yes, I do. And I'm thinking of one very specific response that I've been mulling over a comment that's often asked of me. People often ask me, do you think nowadays we're more aggressive and violent towards people than we used to be? And I'm not sure that's, well, go back 13 years, 14 years when I first started my business. I used to say, I don't think so, really. I'm not too sure about that. I think it's just a different type of aggression and violence. But now, with the age of modern technology and this instant culture that we have, instant gratification, you pick up your phone and you can have the answer to generally everything in some kind of form, whether it's right or wrong, but you'll get a response. You can put it into Google or whatever your preferred search engine is and find out something. And because people are so used to that, further down the road, and they can access all sorts of games and things that require action and response. We have instant, you go onto the London Tube nowadays and we have a little card, the Oyster card, and it'll let you through with your payment. Everything goes smoothly like that. If you go onto the internet, you can pay immediately for something. Everything is instant, or a lot of things are now instant. And when suddenly things aren't at that pace, or your expectation that it will be is now unsatisfied, that's when you get a whole host of new issues that perhaps weren't there before, because the speed of things nowadays is so fast. And that permeates into so many different other areas. If you only look at social media, I work in schools, for example, work with young children, young adults, on bullying. And with all the social media that there is now, things like Snapchat, where you can make some comment and it disappears unless somebody's taken a screen grab of it, that has a whole host of new challenges that weren't there before. It's bullying, but in a slightly different form. And so when I was first initially talking about bullying in schools, it was very much face-to-face techniques, how to deal with bullies. But as time has gone on, people have been asking increasingly about cyberbullying tactics and how you can prevent and protect from a technology point of view. You still need the face-to-face stuff, but it's been, I've noticed it over the years that it's certainly moved more into a technological side of things.
Yeah, I remember at school, I would never say I was excessively bullied, but I did experience some minor where shoulder barge into you occasionally, or the in crowd would exclude you or make you feel uncomfortable. More passive intimidation, if that makes sense, or kind of the looks and the potential threat of something happening rather than the actual. There was always the kind of that kind of implication that something might happen, which is psychological rather than physical, which is I've not been in trauma of it, but I suppose I've become kind of hyper aware of bullying since I transitioned myself, because I'm hyper aware that I polarize the views of certain people. And there are people in this country and around the world that have a kind of an anti or a gender critical view of the world, where trans people are seen as being a threat to that view. And I have suffered in some ways stalking and sort of cyber commenting on posts on LinkedIn, Instagram. I've been the target of comments on newspaper chat comments on the newspaper sites, because I appeared in the Sunday Times and the Daily Mail and the Mirror, things like that, a few years ago. And some of the comments beneath there, I also took part in a documentary online, a Channel 4 documentary. And to see some of the comments on the Facebook post about that, and people wading in. And I also just started an article, a monthly column with the Scottish Herald. And last month, the last one I did was about language. I talked about gendered language and all various other things. And this seems to have rattled the cage of someone who's gender critical. And suddenly I ended up with all this trolling. They stalked me on LinkedIn, and a whole load of people found me on LinkedIn. A whole load of people found me on Twitter, taking the article completely out of context and putting their own thread on this, which is kind of hijacking it. And it wasn't directly targeted at me, but I suddenly realized that I was now vulnerable again, and raised my head above the parapet where people were going to, I now became a target of something. So, yeah, it's very interesting. And I'm now thinking that the next article I'm writing in December, and almost in the back of my mind, I'm worried again about what the backlash may be. Whereas the first three I wrote, I had none of that thought was in my head. I was writing from my own lived experience. But now I'm thinking, I've got to double think what I'm saying. And this is the problem, isn't it? I'm now in this zone where I've got to worry about it.
Oh, well, I could help you with that.
I'm sure you can.
Because, I mean, when you first started talking about schools, and that's something I hear about a lot, but also have experienced myself, because I'm fortunate in that I wasn't badly bullied any more than other people at school. But I think it happens to probably most people at some point in some shape or form. And I was no exception. And I can remember the jostling and the exclusion and I even talk about something when I speak about bullying. I talk about jungle treatment, which is people circling me, wanting to knock me down and feed grass in my mouth. That's the shortened version. And I didn't let it happen. I'd seen it happen to other people. And I used techniques very crudely that came instinctively, but stopped people doing anything. And so it's this a more refined technique that I talk to people about. But when you're talking about transitioning and talking about that, and you talk about various newspapers and how you're concerned about what's going to happen next and how it's going to affect you, I think you're doing absolutely the right thing, because these things need to be talked about and addressed. But from a personal perspective, something I do as a trauma therapist could help you take away that emotional concern and enable you to write without thinking too much about the emotion. You still need to think about the consequences, and that will still be there. But if you can take out the emotion element, you'll probably write a better piece, I would suggest.
Yeah, I think I'm more likely to just proofread it a second time rather than with just an extra lens on it. I'm a pretty resilient person, and I haven't internalized this, but it just woke me up to the fact that I'm not as safe as I was, if you like, or I'm more likely to be. But then if we look at the press, whatever I wrote about, someone's going to make a comment about it. That's what people do. They troll these press sites, and they become keyboard warriors. They hide behind the anonymity of Twitter and things. So I think it just reminded me that this went on, because I often live a very privileged life of not caring or not thinking, and it was just kind of like a knock on the door going, "Don't forget about me," sort of thing. I thought, "Oh yeah, you're still there. Okay, yeah, no, you're there."
And it's worth thinking also that there will be a lot of people out there who you're a resilient person. I'm a pretty resilient person, but there are other people out there who might be in a similar situation as us who aren't as resilient. And I won't mention the details, but something happened recently that I was appalled at. Somebody was not encouraged. Let's just put it like that. Was not encouraged in an environment which is supposed to be extremely encouraging. And I privately messaged the person that had been affected and supported them overtly on this. This it happened to be a Facebook chat, and I was just appalled they'd been treated in that way. And this individual is again quite resilient, but was quite upset by the comments that had been made, which were unthinking and not appropriate to the environment that they were made in. So it can happen in all sorts of different environments, and it's worth thinking that there are people that will react differently to you. And
that's something I talk about in the workplace type environment, where we talk about this banter and this humor that sometimes we have in the workplace, where one person thinks it's kind of jovial and funny, whereas actually the impact of that on others is demeaning. It reinforces stereotypes, or in some cases, it's just another microaggression that's causing them to feel less worthy about themselves, isn't it? And,
yes,
and banter is, but you always get the pushback, but it's only a bit of fun. It's only, we're trying to make the workplace too sanitized and too PC. And people push back, don't they, on this banter? So how do you address that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time people don't intend to hurt or insult. They think they're being funny. They think they're being sociable. That's being positive about it. And you can talk to those people, and if they find out that they are inadvertently causing distress or upsetting somebody, then they'll be mortified and probably apologise and stop doing it, and maybe be over careful. That might be the unintended consequence next time. But there are those people that will be doing it on purpose, and that's why we have the Equality Act, and that's why we have mechanisms in place for protected elements within the Equality Act to make sure that people do get some kind of redress if they need to. But I think there are extreme examples. I remember going to a seminar years ago, and it was all about employment law. And they were talking about employee handbooks, and it's a good idea to have all your discrimination policies and all the rest of it in an employee handbook, of course. And an example was given about a business owner who hated swearing, of all things. Was a very religious person and didn't like any swearing whatsoever. And he'd been taken to industrial tribunal for sacking somebody who'd sworn at work. So his advisor told him, right, okay, you need to put every single word that you find offensive in your employee handbook and say, if you say these words on site, you will be dismissed. And that's what he did. So that's taking it to an extreme. I think that, people do try and have banter, but it's a fine line between upsetting somebody, and if you are on the receiving end of it and you are upset, you need to tell somebody about it and don't keep it to yourself. Otherwise, it's either going to continue because they don't intend to and you've not said anything, or it's going to continue because they find that, yeah, you're hurt and I'm going to make sure you keep on being hurt and I'm going to enjoy it. But once you've actually stood up and said, I don't find what you said amusing, when you say that sort of thing, I feel uncomfortable. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to not speak to me like that, because those particular words are very derogatory. So please, next time, don't use those words, or something along those lines. But that's easier said than done. First of all, you've got the personal potential pain or emotional distress from those words or what's happened or the environment they happened in. But secondly, you've got to learn how to do it thinking, using all your great emotional intelligence and expertise when you're really upset and your amygdala's doing overtime, which is the emotional center of the brain, and you can't get the words out because your cognitive function isn't working very well. So that's what I help people with. I help them calm down so that they can think these things through, have an approach that's going to work, that is neutral, hopefully, rather than aggressive, assertive certainly, but just pointing out open, honest communication. When you said this, I felt like that. So what I'm going to ask you to do, please, is do this. And, just have a structure to responding that is going to work. And if they say, well, you can F off, then you know where you need to go. You might need to complain, find out what the internal workings are of an employer. A good employer will have that very clear in whether it's the handbook or in any other guidance. And they will have access to, talk to a manager or to somebody in personnel, HR, whatever it's called, and they can get some redress, hopefully, before they have to go to a tribunal of some kind or take legal action.
It's interesting what you're saying about swearing then. I was taking part in a webinar, was more of an interactive online meeting. And one of the people who was attending at the meeting, they had a very kind of aggressive posture. They were really leaning into the camera. They were almost like in the frame,
eating the microphone almost.
Well, almost like eating the screen rather than the microphone. It was kind of, they were really into this frame, and they were using swear words like punctuation.
Yeah.
And I found their whole presence in this this event completely distracting. I found their stance, their language, and the way they were talking almost like a bullying type stance. It's almost like posturing and aggressiveness. And at the end, there was a kind of an opportunity for everybody attending to sort of give a bit of group feedback and say what they thought. And I just looked dead in the camera and said, I found this most of this meeting completely offensive. The language used by one of the people was, used swear words as punctuation. Their stance and their aggression is not the kind of event I want to be part of. And I made it quite clear, and kind of everybody in the room I could see everyone else's eyes looking at me, and so I just kept a smile, looking directly at the camera. Just kept my stance and just parked myself with a very relaxed face. As if to stand up to that bullying behaviour. I wasn't going to walk away from it. And a few people after me said, well, I'm glad someone said something, because I found that, again, that they were finding that being in that environment uncomfortable with this person. But the bit I was going to come on to, what you were saying, was it's all very well standing up in that instance, but then you've got to think about whether you're going to get backed by somebody and supported in that claim, whether there's going to be any follow-up victimization. And often people walk away. They often people who are targets of bullying or intimidation are the people that don't know how to stand up for themselves, which is, I appreciate it's exactly where you come in. But there's so much fear of recrimination, fear of the bullying getting worse, isn't there? And this is, I guess, what you do. So what can people do in that situation? Standing up sometimes, running away is often the easiest answer, isn't it?
Yeah, I help people across a range of sort of conflict situations, and you can choose whether you deal with something there and then, and sometimes it's not appropriate to deal with it there and then because you're on the back foot. You haven't got all the information you need perhaps. You're somehow triggered and not thinking straight. You might be very emotional, and that isn't the best time to give of your best. So picking and choosing your time is really important, and place as well, because I've had instances where things have been said and done, and you need to nip that in the bud, but you don't nip it in the bud in front of other people, because they may be your allies or otherwise, depending on their loyalties or how they interpret or perceive the situation. They're not you. They haven't received it the same way as you have, and don't have your background and experience that might mean that something is particularly cutting or hurtful or embarrassing or whatever it might be. So maybe having a chat by the water cooler, the coffee machine, by the kettle, the two of you, is absolutely the best thing to do. But maybe once you've calmed down, or walked out into the yard years ago when I worked at a particular employer. My boss's boss was really, really winding me up. I actually got up and walked out of the office, not in a rage or anything. I just got up. They didn't know I was doing this at all. I just got up, walked out, and walked around the yard outside, which had lots of bits of metal lying in the yard. And it was winter time, and I was frozen, and it just calmed me down and brought me back to reality and how I was going to deal with it. Just so I didn't say or do the wrong thing, because I have done that in the past. You know, another manager at another job, he put me under a lot of pressure, and I just blew up, and it was an open plan office, and it wasn't pretty. So we can really do ourselves a disservice. And being able to be calm in the moment, be able to think, okay, I need to do something different, pick my time and place, and work out what my approach is. You know, work out what's the culture of this organisation I'm in. How do they provide support? Do I need to go and talk to somebody in the union? Do I need to go and talk to a colleague? Just let blow to a friend of mine who will listen. You know, what's the strategy? Is this a one-off? Is it repetitive? Is it part of a pattern of behaviour that's being observed across the culture of the company? What's the best way of approaching this? Because if you blow up like I've blown up in the past, it won't do you any favours. Or if you just walk away, as you've described, Joe, that's not going to deal with the issue. It may well come back to haunt you. Other people may be subjected to it. And the perpetrator, if that's the right word, will be getting off scot-free. And, you know, there's nobody limiting their behaviour, however distasteful and nasty it might be. So it's a real judgment thing, and it's not an easy answer. It's not a quick fix. You can
the reality is it is disturbingly prevalent still in a lot of workplaces where we talk about racism or sexism.
Yeah,
and it may not be seen as playground bullying, but there's a lot of discrimination, which is also bullying. Discrimination is bullying. Mm-hmm. Victimization is bullying. This still goes on in the workplace around women being denied opportunities, being treated in a more demeaning way, the language used, reinforcing limiting beliefs, denial of opportunity for women, for black people, for many minorities. And it's really difficult in the workplace to stand up, because the culture in a lot of organizations is such that the person in power is kind of believed by default. It's kind of, well, they're a good fellow, they're a good person, they've got a high performing team, and of course they're going to react this way. And we hear, we've got the Home Secretary setting a poor example of what is perceived to be acceptable workplace behaviour, haven't we? And but I don't think she is unique in that style of leadership, and that's the sad thing in offices, isn't it? There's a lot of language of the workplace bully exists, and that's how do people overcome that when they feel the dice and the cards are stacked against them?
Sometimes leaders in organisations have to be told that the culture that they think they're leading is not actually the culture that's being developed, because some people who are absolutely have the right instinct and the right approach, non-discriminatory approach, and allow everybody to flourish to the best of their ability, they may be ignorant of what's going on a few levels down. But if they are aware, then there is legislation in place to say, actually, no, this isn't right. And again, a different business I've worked for before was extremely autocratic. And I wouldn't say it was particularly discriminatory, but it was very, you either do it like this or you're out. We'll give you loads of opportunity to do well, but if you foul up, you're out. It was very, very cut and dried. And I eventually left that organisation because it just didn't suit me. And, I didn't think I was being given the opportunities that I was capable of achieving either. So it's two-pronged thing. I could just about put up with the culture, because there were good things about it as well, to be fair. But I wasn't getting on as I wanted to. And I think people sometimes know and sometimes they're ignorant of what's going on in their own workplace. How many senior people bother to go down on the shop floor to find out what's actually happening and how people communicate? And are they the best example of that? I see this all the time when I talk to organisations who have frontline staff who are being abused, threatened with aggression and violence potentially, and their leaders have no idea what's going on. Or if they do, they just ignore it and think, well, that's what they're paid for. That comes with the job. And that's not acceptable. And with the duty of care that organisations have to protect their staff, they should be doing the right thing. They should be going down. In my opinion, leaders should always be mixing with every level of staff in the organisation. And the job of a leader is to lead. And how can you lead if you're in your ivory tower? You can do a certain amount and dictate, but that's not my preferred way of leading. You've got to involve people. You've got to lead people through, actually physically lead them through and show them how things should be done. I remember one train company recently that I've got to be careful what I say now because I've worked with a few. But there's one train company I know where there was a bit of a commotion at a platform, and he asked all of his staff to go down there, but he didn't go. Asked everybody else to go, but he didn't. And I thought that was really telling. And I didn't see that as good leadership at all. There wasn't a good reason why you shouldn't have.
You mentioned about a train company. I was on the train from Waterloo heading towards Portsmouth. It's probably about a year ago. I mean, back in the days when we used to be able to travel, there's yes. Wonderful days where train travel was kind of everyday thing, rather than a treat again. So I was on this train out of Waterloo, and Southwestern trains, or whatever they're called these days. It's about 7 o'clock in the evening, and I normally sit right at the back because I get off at Petersfield, so it's the best place to get off is right at the back of the train. So get straight on the train at Waterloo. Mm-hmm. And that's where normally the buffet trolley sets off from. So they park it up in the little whatever you call the sort of gap in that, where the doors are. So there's a little the corridor area there by the doors, the vestibule, or whatever I think it's called, vestibule, yeah. And so it was a lady who was manning the trolley that day, and she was kind of parked up, ready for the train to set off. Because I think they set off once the train's moving. People are sat down, and then this crowd of office people got on and I suspect they'd already spent the afternoon in the pub, so they were all kind of happy and jolly and lively, and they kind of clocked the buffet trolley and decided they wanted to carry on drinking there and then. So rather than wait until the trolley had set off and started serving, they're going, "Oh, come on, can't you serve us now? Can't you serve us now?" And everyone was coming under a bit of pressure. And eventually they all sat down, and one of the protagonists, the leader of this little group, stood up in his very, very posh suit, and but it's very slurry, sort of. So I said, "Oh, come on, love, you want to serve us. We'll be good. We'll behave. Just want a couple of glasses of wine." And suddenly they put their arm around her, and they were hanging on her, calling her love, and "Come on, love, you want to help us," like this. And I was sort of sat there thinking, this is completely inappropriate. This is completely not acceptable. And I sat there and I pondered. Everybody else was ignoring this. And I eventually took a photograph of what was going on and started filming a bit of it. And I was getting more and more upset with myself for not saying something. I was almost getting to the point where I thought I should have stepped in. I should be saying something. This is not acceptable behaviour. And eventually it stopped, and she passed on down the train. I looked at everybody around me in the carriage saying, "Did you see that? Did you find that appropriate?" And everyone immediately put their newspaper up or their iPad on their phone, looked away from me and went, "Oh, we're not getting involved." And I thought, it's incredible. So I thought, okay, I'm going to report this to British Transport Police. So the number flashed up on the overhead board.
Yeah, the text number, 61016.
Yeah, so I texted that. So I've just witnessed a piece of as assault on a member of staff, because it wasn't assault on a member of staff. She didn't invite. It was physical. It was touching and hugging, and I thought that was assault. I wanted So I reported it and got a message back saying, please email the photographs and the time and any photograph, anything you got. So I emailed it all back. And when the guard came down, collecting tickets, I reported to the guard and said, yeah, just to let you know, I've reported to Transport Police that gentleman over there assaulted your member of staff, and I found the behaviour inappropriate. And then this chap was going to get off the station at Guildford. And I thought, okay, so there was no chance for Transport Police to come on in advance. I thought, well, I was just going to stand up and just say something to this person. So I tried to shake his hand.
Yeah.
And I grabbed his hand and shook his hand. And as I did, I was passively hoping that I would distract him in his drunken state from getting off. So I almost wanted to hold his hand.
You like to live dangerously, Joe, don't you?
So he missed the stop, yeah. And I said, I saw what you did. I've reported what you did to Transport Police. And just to let you know, I thought I found your behaviour completely unacceptable. And he was like, what's going on? And he said, well, I've got to go. I said, do you not feel any remorse? He said, I didn't do it. And he set him off. So, and then I got a call back from Transport Police the next day. I appreciate I'm rambling on a bit about this. But Transport Police decided not to take it any further, or South West Trains decided not to take it any further. Because the person involved, the woman who was, decided it wasn't that much of a problem. So they had no evidence. They had other evidence. It's like, how sad is that someone has to feel that that's part of their job? That they have to put up with that every day or occasions, and how incumbent is on an employer for a duty of care to not, regardless of whether the employee felt they'd been abused, they had CCTV from the train, they had my photographs, there's clear evidence, and they should have stood up and said, actually, that's not behaviour we want passengers to exhibit to our staff, regardless of whether the staff thought it was okay. And I just thought to myself, South West Trains, or whoever the train company was at the time, are not an organisation I don't think their ethics are great here if they're not prepared to stand up and say something at that point. And that was quite disappointing. But the sad thing in relation to what we're talking about here is the lady who was operating the buffet trolley clearly thought this was an everyday occurrence. It happens, and she's almost been socialised to believe it's okay. And that's the sad thing about that story.
It's very different with. I've worked with three train operating companies so far, and they take a very, very different approach to the one that you've experienced. And the very first one I worked on, strangely enough, there's a real strong link to what you've just said. I was brought in because a lady had been sexually assaulted serving food and drink. And poor lady was traumatised, as you might expect. And she wasn't going to go back to work, even though she loved her job. And anyway, the good news story is that she was back at work shortly after I helped her with the trauma therapy. And then we worked with all of the staff, all of the onboard catering staff, to make sure that sort of thing never happened again. And what we did was we trained every single staff member in assertiveness and techniques, but they called it a zero tolerance program, the company. And it wasn't just our training, we were just part of it. What they also did was they put up signs and posters everywhere saying it is not acceptable to do this X, Y, and Z to our staff members. They should be treated with respect. They had little adverts of children dressed up in their parents' clothing, say, please, be nice to my mummy and daddy, or, that sort of thing. And the team they were very focused on customer service, but not customer service at any cost, like you might have experienced on that day when they wanted more and more drink. So when we trained them, it was all about saying and being able to say things like, I can't serve you any more alcohol, sir, I'm so sorry, and moving on. Or if they had their hand put round them, would you please take your arm off me? Would you please stop doing that, sir, madam? Whatever the situation was. And then how to ramp that up if they got a negative response or an abusive response, to the point where we also trained them in self-defense as well. So it was a fantastic program. As I say, we've done that one with 3 different train operating companies very successfully. And what's really gratifying about that is that people have the confidence to turn around and say, please don't do that. And to deal with, I mean, this one was food and drink on the train, but what do you do when somebody's threatened to stub their cigarette out on you because they've been told not to smoke, that drugs involved, football, gangs, all sorts of...
Not wearing a mask.
Yeah.
Not wearing a mask now, yeah.
Smoking, but actually it's a... what's the word?
Vape.
Vaping, thank you.
Vape? Yeah.
Vaping's not allowed on trains, which a lot of people don't understand why. So it's being able to convey why that's not such a good idea and doing it calmly without getting aggressive, without being too passive, just finding that right balance of coming across as professional, customer-focused, but still authoritative and assertive. And it's an interesting mix, and for some that's really difficult. But we do experiential training to get them in a place where they can do it, and they're coached all the way through it, and they leave a course sort of metaphorically 10 feet tall with the confidence, and that's half the battle of being able to do it. If we go back to our earlier conversation about people not being able to do it, well, once they've actually experienced it, and I mentioned to you I might put my dark glasses on. That's what we do. That's what we do. We frighten people deliberately on a course. So I'm now, for the sake of anybody listening to this, I'm putting my dark glasses on. What you looking at? Hey! And because the eyes are hidden, because they betray so much of how we're feeling, and you suddenly get that taken away, and the rest of the body acts very aggressively. We have somebody coming towards you who we call the intimidator. You have a coach standing by your side, and if you react badly, either aggressively or too passively, the coach will immediately step in and modify your behaviour with your support. If you do really well, the coach just says, "Fantastic, Joe, keep on going, that's brilliant," and they just whisper in your ear. So it's actually happening and anchoring that experience, and we make sure it's a successful experience, so that if that ever happens in real life, you switch immediately back to what worked well for you beforehand. We've imprinted it in the amygdala, the emotional center of the brain, which is where you go into when you have your fight or flight experience. So that's why I love doing that. It just helps people deal with really nasty stuff, and or mildly disturbing stuff. It doesn't have to be as high octane as that. But we do the worst so you can cope with anything, really. And we're horrible. We're horrible when we put the glasses on. We say the worst stuff. We really do.
Sometimes on a train or something like that, sometimes it's just about making a very loud noise or saying at the top of your voice, that isn't acceptable.
Absolutely.
And that creates this sort of kind of, everyone now sees what's going on, and the person who is perpetrating is hopefully will realise that they're now being viewed, and they haven't got control of the situation anymore. Yeah,
particularly on a train carriage where you're perhaps moving along at whatever speed you're moving along. You can't escape. So you've got to really work around the furniture in the environment that you're in, and using other people to your benefit. Get people on side, and doing just what you just said. Being very clear, that is not acceptable, sir, madam. You're going to have to stop doing that. I'll have to report you to the police. Whatever the words are that are appropriate. And sometimes the best thing actually is to walk away. When somebody, if you come across somebody who's psychotic, who just doesn't care, if you come across somebody who's waving a needle at you, then you don't confront them, and you get to the other end of the train and you lock yourself in with the driver if you can. If they've got a vendetta against your uniform because you're the figure of authority that's come to challenge them, then get out of there. And in the last resort, if you can't go anywhere, that's when the physical self-defense comes in. But you shouldn't do that unless you really, really have to. So it makes for very interesting training sessions.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you said right at the beginning about sort of the age of 8 is kind of like a formative type age where if you've been used to being abused or being treated badly, you're already kind of feeling more meek and mild, and you become a habitual receiver of bullying or violence. Presumably, the opposite also applies. If you you're used to being treated in a bullying way, do you would also maybe take on the role of a bully as well? Is that cause and effect? If you see, you do. If you experience, it becomes you, or
it can be. I don't think it necessarily has to be. Everybody's situation is different, and it certainly can be that. And that's what used to be trotted out all the time as bullies are people who feel inadequate and they want to get power over other people. I think it's more complex than that. I think that if you've had some nasty physical violence against you in the home, or sexual violence, or something like that, you might just think that's the norm, and that's how you treat people. It's ingrained. It's learned behaviour rather than.
So that's how dad treated mum, or mum treated dad. That's how I will treat my wife or my husband, sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of, that's how marriages work, or that's how parents treat the children.
Yeah, and the same goes for discrimination of all kinds. Whether it's colour of skin, or religion, or how people present themselves, or gender issues, or whatever it happens to be. If you're a little tot growing up and you see your mum or dad doing it, well, that's how you behave, and that's what you learn, unless that gets corrected somehow.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to hear more about your role play stuff. That sounds really, really powerful. I mean, I love experiential learning, and I think real active scenarios where you put people in those zones where they actually feel. Because I think most learning for me occurs when there's a feeling of you stimulate more than just the logic. You stimulate that passion side. So I guess that's how you're training, which you really are creating this feel the need type stuff, aren't you?
Well, it's really tapping into where you go when you're frightened, because we deliberately frighten people in controlled circumstances. We tell people we're going to do that as well, by the way, so they know it. And we get them to sign a piece of paper because we say we're going to say really horrible stuff to you with your permission. If there's something you don't want us to say, then please tell us. Otherwise, we could let anything out of our mouths. And we say that, but also add to it, but please don't tell us if you can, because we're going to use stuff that could really be used against you in real life. And if you block that off, it's not reality. So whilst some people think, well, you can't say that sort of thing, actually, we're doing it for the best of intentions. And I'll give you an example. Again, it's with a train operating company, actually. I remember distinctly that we were doing a training session, probably about 14, 15, 16 people, something like that. And about a quarter of the people that were in the room were black. And we did an intimidating scenario where we had a black lady and I was the intimidator. So I was swearing at her. I used racist language. And I did this to provoke the fear and the anxiety that we need for this to work and for them to benefit the most and learn how to deal with that. And she dealt with me really, really well. She was very professional. She was excellent. Coach helped her a little bit, but she did fantastically well. And so when we're not doing the physical side of things, I retreat. That's how she knows it's working, because I go back because it's not working. And she's very assertive and she dealt with it very well. And as soon as she walked off, she went, "I'm so glad I did this today." But in the audience was a white lady who, it was all about her and her importance on the day. And she complained, "I don't see why you have to use racist behaviour." I said, "Well, I don't like racism any more than you do. But we're doing this because we're trying to be realistic and help anyone on this course prepare most effectively to deal with nasty stuff that might happen." That's what this course is all about. It's about dealing with aggression and violence. So if you limit what we're going to say, and that lady didn't limit us, by the way, she allowed us to deal with it. And she wasn't bothered at all. She was really pleased she'd done it. And the three other black people in the room gave her a round of applause, were very happy with what went. And we did something similar with some of them as well. It wasn't always racist language that we used, It might have been their appearance or their job role or something we weren't happy with in the context of a railway situation from a service point of view. And she wouldn't accept that. She said, no, I still don't see why you have to. I understand the need for it to be realistic, but I still don't understand why you have to use racist language. Like, that's real. I'm sorry, but that's real life, unfortunately. As much as we might not like it not to be, that's real life. And so, you know, if you were on a course, Joe, for example, I would do all sorts of transgender stuff, you know, which other people might think, how dare you do it? But the reason I do it, and I would only do it with your permission, but to put you in a situation where you felt uncomfortable and had to really learn how to deal with it in the moment. And the coach would help you if you were struggling with it. But if you're doing fantastically well, they just say, well done, Joe, keep going, excellent. And we do the same with people of all varieties. I mean, we've had mute people on the course, deaf people on the course, people in wheelchairs, of every colour of skin that you can imagine, from not every nationality, but a lot of different nationalities, from Somalian through to Pakistani to Czech to Slovakian to you name it. We've worked with plenty of lots of different communities, and it's. I'm just trying to think of anybody else who's ever complained about it. I can't think of anybody else, honestly. I've been doing this since about 12 years ago. She's the only person that's actually had a problem, but it was all about her. And she came late for the session. She didn't sign the piece of paper. We didn't get the opportunity to tell her about what the circumstances were and to get her to read the sheet that she needed to sign. And, you know, it was just very unfortunate. But most importantly, the people that needed the help got the help they needed on the day. And so we'd done our job. It's not your usual course.
I can imagine. And often it's people feigning offended on behalf of somebody else when all they're really doing is they're having their kind of privilege challenged, aren't they? They're kind of like, well, I don't want to listen to that language. It doesn't happen in my world, sort of thing. So you're being offensive but they're often not realizing that that's everyday lived experience for many people.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the reality of the world. Yeah,
absolutely. That's where it came from. And I think also, I might be being unfair here, but I sensed a little bit of, well, those poor black people they're not able to look after themselves, so I've got to do this for them. I sensed a little bit of that as well, which I thought was very distasteful.
Well, that benevolence, that paternal kind of, yeah.
So
that's quite prevalent. Yeah, I mean, fortunately, most people that I talk to in the workplace, a lot of this is kind of subtle. It's not overt. Mm-hmm. It's the microaggressions. It's the kind of the whispering behind their backs. If you talk about maybe trans people, the misgendering or the misnaming or that look or the subtle exclusion or being suddenly you find you're tolerated and people walking away from you, or the playground bully stuff, not physical. A lot of it's more mental or subtle, and that's the frustration. This humiliation.
That doesn't always lend itself to the sort of aggression and the high octane stuff I've just described. But what we also do sometimes is, and quite often actually, we do something called forum theatre, where we act out a situation and people throw a situation to us and say, right, can you role play this, please? So two of us role play the situation on their behalf. And then they correct us, say, oh, no, it doesn't work out quite like that. Or they throw in an idea of how it could work. You know, can you replay that, say it like this, or change the circumstance? And they find it very, very practical. And so those microaggressions that you're talking about might be a really good thing to work on there.
I'm just thinking that sort of like in the office where some casual sexism is at play, where the woman in the room is expected to clear the table after the meeting or make the coffees or be talked over. So it's more techniques to be able to exert your presence, your authority, seek allies, seek people around you to amplify you, and to say, actually, it's not my role to clear the coffee cups up. Can somebody? It's not fair, or whatever the retort is, or it might be. In my particular instance, if someone calls me mate, it's like, actually, I'm not your mate. That's not language I like to use.
Yeah.
I don't mind if you. Personally, I don't mind if you call me love, whereas many women will find love offensive, but I kind of think it's actually quite validating. To be treated in a sexist way is perversely quite validating for me.
I get that. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the kind of the workplace things that go on day in, day out. And that's, if you like, they're not physical, they're not overt. I mean, I think the experiential stuff you're doing here is very much out in the street. And I fully understand it. I fully see the need of it. It's how can people learn these techniques for these subtle things, isn't it? The drip stuff.
Yeah, that's more the forum theatre stuff that we do, and sitting down and talking things through. But again, it can be extremely upsetting when you're on the receiving end. So having we train people in something called heart rate variability control, for example, so that you control the sinusoidal wave of your heart rate and how it changes, because your heart's changing all the time. And if you can control that, you control the overproduction of adrenaline and cortisol. You make yourself feel much better through producing something called DHEA, and have more focus by producing something called acetylcholine. If you can get the frequency of your heart working correctly, and we teach people how to do that, and it enables you to access your thinking brain again. So if you've slipped into fight or flight, then this can just focus you back very quickly. So you can use all of that great experience and abilities, and you can herd people to help you and support you and have a strategy. But if you can't do that, or you're terrified, or you're frozen, which happens to a lot of people, especially on our intimidating courses like bunny in the headlights type of thing. If you don't have those techniques, you can't then move forwards, and you can't have those discussions and use those techniques that can really assert the situation is not correct, and would you please do this type of response. It's a challenge. When you said something about I'm not your mate, it just made me laugh, because I'm known in my family as saying things like that. So we had, at home, we had a guy round making some electrical repairs around the house, and every second word was mate. All right, mate, we're going to put that installation there, mate, and then we're going to do this, mate, and then we're going to do that, mate. And I got sick and tired of it, and I said, look, can I just stop you there? I'm not your mate. You can call me Mark. You can call me the boss. You can call me sir. You can call me customer, Mr. Customer. But I'm not your mate. I'm your customer. And when my kids heard that, they're like, Dad, you can't say that. I said, well,
someone has to.
Yeah,
somebody has to say that. Yeah, that's
you really do sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned HRV, and I found out a little bit about HRV. I was at a seminar probably just over a year ago. And there was this study going on around the impact of HRV, or the correlation between HRV and stress. And they found 30 CEOs, and they wired them up with a monitor 24/7 for like 3 or 4 weeks. And they wired up some other people who are not in those kind of roles, people in sort of kind of benevolent, sort of calm roles. And what they identified is some of these CEOs, so red in their language was was a low HRV. So a low HRV is bad, high HRV is good. You want a big heart rate variability rather than a little one. That's what they were saying. So they identified that a lot of these CEOs had HRV in a dangerous way, almost 24/7. So even when they were sleeping, the HRV was in the stress zone. And they identified that over the course of a day, they probably had 5 or 10 minutes spread throughout the day where their HRV was kind of relaxed. And then they compared that with the HRV of people in non-stressful roles, or people who've got their kind of stress under control. And they were the almost like polar opposite, where their HRV would spike. But all their sleep pattern was unbroken by basically this HRV being kind of in the green zone. And so there's a huge link between heart attacks, strokes, mental well-being on HRV as well. So you're talking about this fight or flight. And I also noticed that my Apple Watch now has this Breathe app, and the Breathe app when you activate the breathe functionality, it actually it causes an HRV mechanism to monitor during that breathe cycle. So I've become, since that talk, and you mentioned, I've become kind of aware of the link between HRV, stress, anxiety, and other things.
Yeah, it's all interlinked. I first started working in that in 2007, and I've got a little piece of software on my computer that I hook people up to so that they can actually see their heart rate variability as they're doing this exercise. And there's all sorts of software that can help train people to do it. And it's a bit of fun, but it's very, very practical stuff. That's all I'm interested in, practical things that will help.
Well, I just think I'm fairly relaxed a lot of the time these days, but my HRV is not great, and I don't know why that is, because I'm pretty chilled out. I don't worry about a lot at the moment, and I'm trying to figure out why my HRV is. So I've got a very low HRV, which I think is bad, isn't it? You want big variability to indicate your.
Well, I've been doing this quite a while, and I often get people out to demonstrate how you can, by yourself, learn how to control your heart rate variability. And to me, it's the shape of the curve that's more important. Some people have much shorter curves than others. So I'm not familiar with the research that you're talking about. I'd be very interested to have a look at it. But to my mind, having done this for a long time, it's not so much the variability and the elasticity of your heart rate reduces as you get older anyway. So as you get older, you're going to have less of a peak and trough anyway, simply because your heart, imagine that when you're a 10-year-old, then you're a 20-year-old, you have very huge flexibility in all of your body, not just your heart. And it's just a symptom of that. Whereas as you get older, things seize up a bit and don't work quite as well.
I think that was the key thing, the recovery, going from high anxiety to low anxiety. That was the key, as you said. That the curve on the way back down is the important thing.
Yeah. It's and it's easy to learn. It's just simple techniques, but then you can bolster it with some psychological techniques. And if we had more time, I could go into some of those and explain how they work. But
sure. I mean, I do suffer from high blood pressure, and whenever I was having my blood pressure taken, I knew that if I could get myself into a zone and I could reduce it from being 150 over to 120 over just by putting myself in this place in my head.
Yeah.
And I could actually think my blood pressure down.
Yes.
And the nurse looked at me like I was crazy. I said, well, no, just give me a second. Now, and she'd go, wow, how did you do that? I said, I just got to put myself in this place where I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's like a micro meditation, isn't it? It's kind of some way of just knowing you can take control of your body again.
Yeah, I use distraction techniques in a whole host of things. I mean, in heart rate variability, and also when I do havening, for example, as well, which is a trauma therapy I use. And the power of the mind is phenomenal, and we don't tap into it enough. We allow it to run us rather than us take control. So I help people take the control back.
Well, on that note, I think we could talk. We've been going just over an hour. I'm sure we could talk for a lot longer. And yeah, we have. And I think what we'll do is if we wrap it up there. I mean, and anyone who's listening, I'm sure can get in contact with you. So how can people get in touch? What's the best way of finding you?
Well, it's been pretty enjoyable, Joe. Thanks for that. I wasn't anticipating the breadth of stuff we were going to talk about today. But to get in touch, if you look Mark Wingfield from Max up, MAX, you'll find me in any search engine. But I'm on LinkedIn, a little bit on Twitter. I've just started on Instagram. I'm just dipping my toe in Instagram. That's under Max Train Develop. And I have a haveningmax.com is my havening website. But I'm also on maxconflictmanagement.com because that's a lot of the bread and butter work that I normally do. That's always MAX. So thank you very much indeed, Joe. It's been fun. And we'll talk again soon.
Didn't you mention that you've got an offer for anyone who's listening that they can take advantage of in the new year? Is that right?
Yeah, thanks for reminding me, Joe. I've forgotten all about that. I run online workshops to learn how to reduce fear and anxiety. And they've been very successful and popular since I first started doing them in May. And they're continuing. So into the new year, there'll be various dates on my Eventbrite site. So again, if you look up Max Training and Development on Eventbrite, and if you put in Joe Lockwood as a code, that's J-O, so capital letter J, then lowercase, that's the word, lowercase o, and then uppercase L, and then the rest of Lockwood as a code, no gaps. As a thank you for anybody coming on here and listening to me spout away for a little while, there's an immediate 10% off coming along there. And so, yeah, everybody welcome to come along. You don't have to talk about what it might be that upsets you or you want to work with. It's very quick, it's permanent, it's fantastic. So come along, experience. There's a video on the Eventbrite page to explain what all that's about. But thank you for reminding me, Joe. Yeah, that's open to anybody.
Brilliant. What I'll do is I'll make sure we put those details on the show notes and when we share this episode. So, yeah, click below, you'll find it, and we'll make sure you do that. So, thank you very much, and a huge thank you to the listeners, for tuning in. Please do subscribe and keep updated on future episodes of the Inclusion Bites podcast. That's BITES. Tell your friends. Tell your colleagues. I'm sure you have loads. Well, I've got a number of exciting guests lined up, just like Mark, and I'm sure you'll be inspired by them over the next few weeks and months. And of course, if you'd like to be a guest, if you'd like to inspire people, I'd welcome you to get in touch as well. So, as always, if you've got any ideas, feedback, suggestions, then please do email me to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. I'd love your thoughts on how we can improve. So finally, my name is Joanne Lockwood, and it's been an absolute pleasure to host this podcast for you today. Catch you next time. Bye.